voters hit. 3 years later, due to criminal fraud, spending for that program ballooned to more than $170 million. From $4 million to $170 million, that's 37 times as much in just 3 years. Money completely stolen. As the governor and others in Minnesota, the Democrat elected officials looked the other way. Taxpayers similarly paid $21 million in 2021 for something called Minnesota's Housing Stabilization Services. The first 6 months of last year, due to criminal fraud, Democrats looking the other way, taxpayers paid nearly 3 times that amount. A Medicaid program claiming to help Minnesota children with autism, $6 million in 2018. By 2023, due to criminal fraud, it went from $6 million to $192 million. And daycare fraud is just one of these brazen schemes where the Democrats in Minnesota look the other way. Last month, an independent journalist visited 10 state-funded daycare sites in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul. He found no children at the daycare centers. Middle of the day, not a single child was there. 1 year ago, a local reporter visited several of those same sites. The reporter found no children at the daycare centers. They're supposed to be daycare centers, and they're getting paid to take care of children. Well, here's one of those sites, Mr. President. This is a sign from one of the states. It's called, who makes this? You can't make this stuff up. Quality Learning Center. It's supposed to be a learning center. They can't even spell learning right. But that doesn't stop the Democrats in Minnesota to keep shoveling money right to these programs, stealing money from the taxpayers, from the Democrats, going to Democrats who are running these things. Mr. President, it's appalling. The people of the United States are appalled and are furious. This ought to be a red flag for fraud. Why aren't the Democrats who run the place doing anything about it? There were 95 violations for this Learning Center alone between 2019 and 2023. Violations occurred, no records on the children. But in Minnesota, run by the Democrats, taxpayer money continued to flow. It's disgraceful, Mr. President. These aren't just one-off abuses. We now know that the fraud schemes used in the state's child care programs have been used to defraud other social programs as well. Even the New York Times has pointed to this. They say the fraud in Minnesota, run by the Democrats, is, quote, staggering in its scale and brazenness. I don't see any Democrats coming to the floor here today to point out the fraud, talk about what's happening there, how the money's been stolen from people that need it, the services that are needed by people. That means they're not getting it. The Department of Justice is
collapse. It starts quietly. Invoices approved, checks cut, oversight deferred, until one day someone adds up the numbers and realizes the system wasn't just strained, it was being harvested. That's the backdrop for this moment in the Senate, where the issue isn't ideology or messaging. It's whether a public program meant to help vulnerable people was left so exposed that criminal networks treated it like an open market. Only after that framing does Senator John Barrasso step in, not to introduce a new accusation, but to argue that the scale of the failure can no longer be ignored. Barrasso describes Minnesota's Medicaid system as having created a fraud tourism industry, where criminals allegedly set up fake providers and billed the state for services that never existed. That phrase lands because it reframes the problem. This isn't just about a few bad actors slipping through the cracks. It's about a system whose rules, incentives, and enforcement gaps made fraud predictable and profitable. For ordinary taxpayers, the relevance is immediate. Barrasso points out that at least $9 billion was allegedly stolen, an amount he notes rivals half of Minnesota's total Medicaid spending. That's money people assume is paying for care, staffing, and access. Instead, according to prosecutors, it funded shell companies, empty facilities, and paper services. What stands out isn't only the fraud itself, it's how long it appears to have gone on.
Mr. President, when government wastes taxpayer money, taxpayers have a right to know what happened. And when emboldened criminals steal money intended to help single moms and children in need, taxpayers have a right to be angry. And Americans, and I'm hearing it in Wyoming, and I'm sure you're hearing it, Mr. President, in your home state of Ohio, Americans are infuriated with the staggering amount of fraud unfolding today in the state of Minnesota. The past few weeks have shown just how deep the corruption and will increase accountability. Additionally, Republicans are conducting aggressive congressional oversight. On Friday, the entire Senate Republican conference demanded Governor Walz explain his actions. We asked 9 specific, detailed questions. Questions such as why Minnesota failed to adopt key fraud prevention measures. Why aren't they trying to prevent the fraud? Why do they keep looking the other way? These are measures that the Department of Health and Human Services recommended to Minnesota back in May. Nope, Governor Walz, nothing to do with it. He knew about this widespread fraud. He refused to do anything about it. Senate Republicans are ready to give the Trump administration the manpower it needs to tackle this fraud in Minnesota and wherever else it appears and occurs. Now, the Trump administration has asked the Senate to confirm a new Assistant Attorney General position, a position that will be focused on the fraud. And the Senate will get that person in place and on the job quickly, Mr. President. The Trump administration has taken other bold and decisive actions to stop fraud. To further strengthen enforcement efforts, the Department of Justice has doubled the number of attorneys handling these fraud cases. The Treasury Department is cracking down on businesses in Minnesota for alleged money laundering, because that's what's happening. The Department of Health and Human Services under President Trump froze federal funding for fraud-prone programs in Minnesota. If Senate Democrats cared about stopping fraud, why are they preparing to vote today to loosen eligibility and income verifications for Obamacare subsidies? They ought to want to be tightening these things up. But that's what the Congressional Review Act resolution from Democrat Senator Mark Warner of Virginia does, and we're going to vote on it today. Eliminating these vital protections invites more fraud. It means subsidies go to individuals who don't qualify for them. Congress shouldn't make it easier to defraud the American taxpayers. This is a wrong direction to take after the biggest fraud scandal in Minnesota history. Protecting taxpayer dollars should not be a partisan issue. The fraud scandal in Minnesota should be a wake-up call for every American taxpayer. Our federal government spends nearly $1.5 trillion each and every year to try to help feed and house and treat and care for vulnerable families and children. Those programs are there for a reason. The Democrats seem to be a piggy bank for people who want to steal from the government.
What makes this moment matter isn't who raised it or who's blamed. It's the reminder that large public programs don't fail loudly. They fail quietly until the cost becomes undeniable. Fraud on this scale isn't a partisan talking point. It's a systems failure with real consequences for taxpayers and the people those programs are supposed to serve. And once trust is broken at that level, restoring it costs far more than the money that was lost.